Welcome to Trend Reddit, where I share interesting, useful, and inspiring content. Let's explore the world together through the videos I create. Don't forget to click the follow button so you don't miss anything new. Thank you for visiting and hope we have great experiences together. Sarah Thompson stood at the window of her cozy suburban home, gazing out at the sun-drenched yard where her children would soon play. The scent of freshly baked cookies wafted through the air, mingling with the sounds of chirping birds, as she flipped through a stack of baby books on the counter. Each turn of the page brought her one step closer to welcoming the twins she had longed for after years of trying. Her heart swelled with joy and anticipation. Michael, her husband, had been her rock, always supportive and encouraging. The day they discovered they were expecting twins felt like a dream come true. They had spent countless evenings discussing names, decorating the nursery, and dreaming about family adventures. For the first time in years, their future felt bright, filled with hope and excitement. But life, as Sarah was about to learn, had a cruel way of intervening. It was an ordinary Thursday evening when Sarah received the phone call that would change everything. Her heart raced as she answered, her smile fading into a frown as the voice on the other end delivered the devastating news. Michael had been involved in a serious car accident. They hadn't found his body, and he was presumed dead. Time stood still. The world around her faded into a blur as a suffocating wave of grief crashed over her. She clutched the phone tightly, her knuckles turning white, as tears streamed down her face. The vibrant colors of her life, once so vivid, dulled into shades of gray. Michael was gone, and with him, her dreams of a happy family. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of Michael's absence became unbearable. Sarah tried to focus on preparing for the twins, but each moment was overshadowed by her sorrow. Then came the letters and phone calls, debt collectors demanding payments for money Michael had owed. Each ring of the phone sent chills down her spine, reminding her of the fragile reality she now faced. She had no knowledge of these debts, and now, alone and pregnant, she was drowning in a sea of financial burdens. Sarah Thompson, a stern voice called from the other end of the line. "We need to discuss your husband's debts. You're responsible for them now." Each call left her shaking, and the harassment escalated. They threatened her with lawsuits, garnished wages, and even suggested she was at risk of losing her home. The joy she had felt about her twins was eclipsed by the fear that loomed over her like a storm cloud. In a desperate attempt to keep her head above water, Sarah took on multiple jobs. Mornings at a coffee shop, afternoons cleaning houses, and evenings working at a local diner became her new reality. Exhaustion settled into her bones, but she pushed through, reminding herself of the tiny lives she was carrying. She wanted them to have a stable home, one filled with love, not fear. But as the months passed, the stress took its toll. One evening, after an especially grueling shift, Sarah collapsed in the kitchen. The exhaustion had finally caught up with her, and she woke up in the hospital, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling her nostrils. A kind nurse gently squeezed her hand. "You need to take care of yourself, Sarah. Pushing yourself like this is dangerous, especially with twins on the way." Sarah nodded, tears prickling her eyes. She felt overwhelmed, trapped in a cycle of anxiety and exhaustion. "I have to keep going," she whispered. "I have to provide for them." The nurse's expression softened, but she knew Sarah needed help. When she was discharged, Sarah returned home to find a note on her door, "We're coming for you. Pay up or face the consequences." Desperation clawed at her heart, and she knew something had to change. With her future and her children's safety at stake, Sarah began searching for a way out of her nightmare. It was then that she discovered a job opportunity that seemed too good to be true, a position as a waitress on a luxury cruise ship. The thought of leaving her children, even temporarily, filled her with dread, but she felt it was her only option. With the help of her neighbor, Mrs. Reynolds, who offered to care for the twins, Sarah took the plunge. The cruise promised good pay, and she was determined to work hard and earn enough to pay off Michael's debts. As she boarded the cruise ship, a mix of anxiety and determination coursed through her veins. She would do whatever it took to secure a future for her children, even if it meant sacrificing her comfort and leaving them behind for a while. Little did she know that her life was about to take another unexpected turn, one that would force her to confront her past and the man she thought she had lost forever. As the ship sailed into the horizon, Sarah stood on the deck, the wind whipping through her hair, unaware of the storm that awaited her and the shocking discovery that would change everything. After Michael's presumed death, Sarah was overwhelmed by grief. Each day felt like an uphill battle, her heart aching for the man she loved and the future they had dreamed of together. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now echoed with silence. She wandered through the empty rooms, memories flooding her mind, Michael's laughter, the way he would make her feel safe, the plans they had made for their family. Now, all of it seemed like a cruel joke played by fate. As she tried to cope with her loss, the weight of reality began to crush her. She had been so focused on her grief that she hadn't considered the practicalities of life without Michael. The phone calls started innocently enough, at first just a few missed calls from unfamiliar numbers. But soon, they escalated into relentless harassment from debt collectors demanding payments for money Michael owed. She felt a cold dread settle in her stomach as the realization dawned on her: Michael had left her with more than just heartbreak. Sarah Thompson, a stern voice on the other end of the line, demanded one evening. "We need to discuss your husband's debts. You're responsible for them now." The words were like daggers, piercing her heart and twisting in the wound. She had no knowledge of these debts, no idea what Michael had been hiding from her. As the days turned into weeks, the calls became a nightmare she couldn't escape. The collectors were relentless, their threats growing more aggressive. They warned her of impending lawsuits, the risk of losing her home, and the possibility of financial ruin. "Pay what you owe or face the consequences," one collector shouted before slamming the phone down, leaving Sarah trembling. Each call left her shaking, the sound of her phone ringing becoming a source of anxiety. The joy she had felt about her twins was eclipsed by fear, anxiety, and helplessness. How could she provide for them when she was drowning in a sea of financial burdens she hadn't even known existed? The future she had envisioned with Michael, filled with laughter and love, was now a daunting abyss of uncertainty. As the pressure mounted, Sarah's emotional state began to deteriorate. She struggled to find solace, her grief compounded by the stress of dealing with the creditors. She tried to keep a brave face, to focus on her pregnancy and the babies growing inside her. But the worry and anxiety gnawed at her, robbing her of sleep and peace. In an effort to regain control, Sarah took on multiple jobs. Mornings were spent at a local coffee shop, afternoons cleaning houses, and evenings working as a waitress at a diner. Exhaustion settled into her bones, but she pushed through, reminding herself of the tiny lives she was carrying. Every hour she spent working was a chance to secure a future for her twins. But despite her best efforts, the stress took its toll. One evening, after an especially grueling shift, Sarah felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The room spun, and she stumbled, collapsing on the kitchen floor. When she awoke, the harsh lights of a hospital room blinded her. A kind nurse stood by her side, a look of concern etched on her face. "You've pushed yourself too hard, Sarah," the nurse said gently. "You need to take care of yourself and those babies. Stress like this isn't good for you or them." The nurse's words echoed in her mind as she lay in the hospital bed, feeling helpless and alone. She was overwhelmed, trapped in a cycle of anxiety and exhaustion. The thought of her twins, of bringing them into a world filled with uncertainty and danger, was unbearable. Would she be able to provide for them? Could she keep them safe? When she was discharged, Sarah returned home to find a note pinned to her door. "We're coming for you. Pay up or face the consequences." The threat sent chills down her spine. Each day brought new challenges, but the fear of losing everything was the heaviest weight of all. Desperation clawed at her heart, and she knew something had to change. It was a breaking point that drove her to search for a way out of her nightmare. She scoured job listings, desperate for anything that would bring in enough money to pay off Michael's debts. But as time wore on, the pressure from the debt collectors intensified, becoming more aggressive and relentless. One night, As Sarah sat alone in the dim light of her living room, a sense of dread washed over her. The phone rang again, and she picked it up hesitantly, her heart racing. "Sarah, we need to talk," the voice on the other end said, cold and demanding. The fear gripped her tightly, but she knew she had to stay strong. For the sake of her children, she had to fight back against the tide threatening to drown her. But with each passing day, she felt more cornered, the walls closing in around her. She was a woman alone, grappling with grief and the unbearable weight of responsibility. As her pregnancy progressed, Sarah felt more determined than ever to find a way to provide for her twins. She refused to let the debts consume her, clinging to the hope that somehow, she would find a way out of this darkness. The thought of her children kept her going, fueled her resolve, and made her push through the pain. Yet deep down, she knew she needed help. She needed a plan, a way to escape this nightmare once and for all. And as the days turned into weeks, the flicker of determination in her heart began to grow brighter. The fight for her future and the lives of her children had just begun. As the weeks went by, the pressure on Sarah intensified, enveloping her in a suffocating grip. The debt collectors seemed to multiply, their relentless demands echoing in her mind. They called at all hours, their voices a constant reminder of her precarious situation. With every ring of the phone, her heart raced, bracing for the confrontation that felt inescapable. The threats escalated, shifting from cold and distant to brazen and aggressive. One afternoon, Sarah was in the middle of a cleaning job when she received a knock at the door. She opened it to find a man standing on her porch, his expression hardened and eyes cold. "Sarah Thompson," he barked, not bothering with pleasantries. "We need to talk about your husband's debts. You're in serious trouble." Panic surged through her. I'm doing everything I can to manage," she stammered, glancing nervously over her shoulder, aware of the vulnerability of her situation. "Your excuses won't cut it," he replied, stepping closer, his tone dripping with intimidation. "You need to pay up, or we'll have no choice but to take action." With that, he handed her a notice and turned on his heel, leaving her trembling in the doorway. The note read like a sentence, a demand for payment that was far beyond her means, with threats of legal action looming ominously. It felt like a kick to the gut, a stark reminder of the reality she couldn't escape. The weight of her circumstances began to suffocate her. Every aspect of her life felt tainted by anxiety. The twins inside her stirred, responding to her heightened stress, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was failing them even before they were born. The joy she had once felt about their arrival was overshadowed by fear and uncertainty. How could she bring children into this chaos? Determined not to succumb, Sarah threw herself into her work. She took on more shifts, stretched her hours, and pushed her body to its limits. Mornings turned into afternoons, afternoons into late nights, and still, the pressure continued to mount. She juggled multiple jobs, her energy waning as the demands on her time and body multiplied. Yet, despite her efforts, the debt collectors were unyielding. They began to show up at her door, refusing to accept her apologies or explanations. One day, as she returned home from an exhausting shift at the diner, she opened her front door to find two men waiting on her porch. "Sarah Thompson," one of them said, his demeanor predatory. "We've been trying to reach you. You're in serious debt, and it's time to pay up." "I'm doing my best," she replied, her voice shaking. "I can't afford what you're asking." "You better find a way," he warned, stepping closer. "Or we'll take matters into our own hands." The implication hung in the air like a heavy fog. Fear gripped her heart, and she stepped back, closing the door in a panic. She leaned against it, her breathing rapid, her mind racing. How had it come to this? How had her life spiraled into chaos so quickly? Exhaustion and anxiety took their toll on her health. One evening, after a long day of cleaning houses, she collapsed in the kitchen, the world spinning around her. When she opened her eyes, she found herself in a hospital room, the sterile scent of antiseptic overwhelming her senses. A nurse stood nearby, looking concerned. "You pushed yourself too hard, Sarah," the nurse said gently. "You need to slow down." Stress isn't good for you or your babies. The nurse's words lingered in Sarah's mind as she lay in the hospital bed. She felt utterly defeated, trapped in a cycle of grief and responsibility. A part of her wanted to curl up and disappear, to escape the crushing weight of her reality. But another part of her, the part that was fiercely protective of her children, knew she couldn't give in. "I have to keep going," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "I have to take care of them." The nurse nodded, her expression softening. "You need to take care of yourself first, Sarah. You can't support them if you're not well." With her health on the line, Sarah was left with a choice: to continue fighting against an overwhelming tide or to accept help. But asking for help felt like admitting defeat, and pride held her back. She had always been independent, relying on her strength and resilience to face life's challenges. Now, that same resilience felt like a double-edged sword, cutting her deeper as the burdens mounted. As the days passed, the reality of her situation sank in. The constant barrage of phone calls and demands left her in a state of perpetual anxiety. The thought of losing her home, of being unable to provide for her children, gnawed at her. Desperation clawed at her insides, pushing her to consider options she would never have entertained before. One night, after an especially grueling shift, she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall as tears streamed down her face. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating her under the weight of despair. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the noise in her mind, the relentless demands of the debt collectors, and the haunting fear of what might happen if she couldn't turn things around. "I need a way out," she whispered to herself, feeling the heaviness of her situation seep into her bones. The fight for her future and the lives of her children had to take a new direction, but she felt lost, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. That night, as she lay in bed, Sarah made a silent promise to her twins. She would find a way to secure a future for them, no matter what it took. The thought of their little faces kept her anchored, fueling her determination to fight against the mounting pressure that threatened to consume her. With the weight of the world on her shoulders, she steeled herself for the battle ahead, vowing not to let Michael's choices dictate her fate any longer. Desperation clawed at Sarah as she searched for a way out of her nightmare. The relentless pressure from debt collectors loomed over her like a dark cloud, threatening to consume her entirely. Every day felt like a battle against time, and as her pregnancy progressed, the weight of her responsibilities grew heavier. Then, one evening while scrolling through job listings on her phone after another exhausting day, she stumbled upon an ad that caught her eye: wait staff needed for luxury cruise ship. Competitive pay, room and board provided. Her heart raced as she read through the details. The opportunity seemed almost too good to be true. It was a chance to escape her current situation, to earn a substantial income while being provided for. But the idea of leaving her children, even temporarily, filled her with dread. How could she take this opportunity when it meant being away from them? Sarah put her phone down and ran a hand over her growing belly. "I need to do this for you," she whispered to her unborn twins. The thought of giving them a better future drove her decision. With her financial burdens weighing heavily on her, she recognized that this might be her only chance to secure their safety. After a sleepless night spent tossing and turning, Sarah made her decision. The following morning, she called the cruise line and applied for the position. To her surprise, she was offered the job within days. Excitement mingled with anxiety as she prepared for the next step. If you think the story is good, leave a comment with the number 1, and if not, please subscribe to the channel. If the video is helpful to you, don't forget to hit the like button. Telling Mrs. Reynolds, her neighbor, about her decision was daunting. Mrs. Reynolds had been a rock for Sarah, helping her navigate the challenges of single motherhood since Michael's death. But when Sarah shared the news, Mrs. Reynolds' eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "You have to do this, Sarah. It's a fantastic opportunity," she exclaimed, her voice full of encouragement. "I'll take care of the twins while you're gone. You need to take this chance to make a better life for them." Sarah felt a swell of gratitude. With Mrs. Reynolds' support, she felt more at ease about leaving her children in good hands. After all, she would only be gone for a few months, and the financial stability she could provide for them was worth the temporary separation. As the departure date approached, Sarah busied herself with preparations. She packed her bags, ensuring she had everything she would need for the cruise. Every item she folded into her suitcase was a step toward hope, a promise to her twins that she was doing this for them. On the day of her departure, Sarah hugged her twins tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I'll be back soon, I promise," she whispered, pressing a kiss to each of their foreheads. Mrs. Reynolds waved her off with a warm smile, assuring her that everything would be fine. The cruise ship was a floating paradise, a stark contrast to the chaos Sarah had left behind. The shimmering ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, and the ship was filled with laughter and music. As she began her training, Sarah felt a sense of excitement bubbling within her. The work was demanding but rewarding. Each day was filled with challenges: serving meals, attending the guests, and keeping the dining area spotless. Despite the exhaustion, she found solace in the camaraderie of her fellow waitstaff. They were a diverse group, each with their own story, but they were united in their shared goal of earning money and creating a better life. Sarah poured herself into her work, motivated by the vision of a brighter future for her twins. She saved every penny she earned, knowing it would help her pay off the debts that had haunted her. Each evening, she returned to her cabin, her heart swelling with determination. But one fateful day, everything changed. During a routine shift, Sarah was assigned to serve a private dinner in one of the ship's exclusive dining rooms. As she entered with a tray of dishes, her breath caught in her throat. Sitting at a table was a familiar figure, Michael. At first, she couldn't believe her eyes. This was the man she had mourned for 7 years, the man she thought was dead. Her heart raced as a mixture of shock and disbelief washed over her. He looked well, dressed in an expensive suit, laughing and chatting with a beautiful woman beside him. Sarah's mind raced. How could this be? Why was he here, alive and seemingly thriving? The sight of him triggered a whirlwind of emotions. Rage bubbled up inside her, mixing with the pain that had festered over the years. She was filled with questions, each one more insistent than the last. Summoning her courage, Sarah composed herself and stepped forward. The woman at the table noticed her first, her expression shifting to one of surprise. Michael looked up, and for a brief moment, confusion flickered across his face before it morphed into recognition. "Sarah," he stammered, shock evident in his voice. In that moment, everything came crashing down around her. The man she thought was gone had faked his death, leaving her to grapple with the aftermath of his actions. The pain of betrayal consumed her as she struggled to maintain her composure. "Michael," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "You have a lot to answer for." The confrontation she had never imagined now loomed before her, and she knew her life was about to change once again. The unexpected opportunity that had initially filled her with hope had turned into a shocking revelation that would force her to confront the man who had shattered her world. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest as the reality of the situation washed over her. She had spent years mourning Michael, grappling with the aftermath of his presumed death, and now he was sitting right in front of her, alive and well. The anger that bubbled within her was difficult to contain. "Michael," she said, her voice low but firm. "I can't believe this. How could you? How could you just leave me like that?" Michael shifted in his seat, his expression a mixture of shock and confusion. He looked as if he were struggling to find the right words. "Sarah, I..." "Save it," she interrupted, the floodgates of her emotions opening. "You have no idea what I've been through since you left. I thought I was a widow. I thought I was raising our children alone because you were dead." The woman sitting next to Michael glanced between them, her eyes wide with concern. Sarah couldn't focus on her, all she could see was Michael, the man she had loved with all her heart, the man who had shattered her world without a second thought. "I never wanted any of this," he finally said, his voice shaky. "I didn't think." "Didn't think what?" Sarah snapped, her emotions surging. "Didn't think about me? About the children?" You just decided to disappear? Faked your death to escape your debts and start a new life? Michael lowered his gaze, the weight of her words hitting him hard. I thought it was the only way out, he murmured. I thought I was protecting you and the kids. Protecting us? Sarah echoed, disbelief flooding her voice. You left us in a nightmare. I've been harassed by debt collectors, drowning in grief, and you think that was protecting us? Tears streamed down her face as the memories flooded back, long nights spent crying alone, the anxiety that had wrapped itself around her like a suffocating blanket, the fear of losing everything. I had to fight for our children alone. I had to carry the burden of your choices. Michael opened his mouth to respond but faltered, words failing him. He looked pained, and Sarah could see the regret etched on his face, but it wasn't enough. You have no idea how hard it's been, she continued, her voice trembling with rage. How could you enjoy this life while I was left to pick up the pieces? I didn't enjoy it, he said, finally meeting her gaze. I've been living with this guilt. I thought I could make things right, but I didn't know how. Make things right? Sarah scoffed, disbelief evident in her tone. You think pretending to be dead and running away is making things right? You abandoned us, Michael. You made your choice, and now you have to face the consequences. Michael's eyes flickered with emotion, and for a moment, Sarah thought she might see a glimpse of the man she once loved. I never meant for it to come to this, he said, desperation in his voice. I thought if I could disappear, I could start fresh and find a way to fix everything. By leaving me to struggle alone, she shot back. You thought I wouldn't find out? You thought you could just erase yourself from our lives and we would be okay? How could you be so selfish? Selfish? Michael said, his voice rising in indignation. I was trying to survive. The debts were piling up, and I didn't see a way out. I thought disappearing was the only option I had left. Surviving? Sarah echoed, incredulous. You're talking about survival while I was left to fend for myself and our children. You've destroyed everything we built together. The anger that had fueled her words began to fade, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. What about the twins, Michael? What about the life we were supposed to have? At the mention of their children, Michael's expression softened, and he seemed to realize the gravity of his actions. I love them, Sarah. I never stopped loving you or the kids. I just thought. Thought what? She pressed, her heart racing. Thought you could just walk away and we would be better off without you? You're delusional. Do you have any idea what you put me through? Do you have any idea how hard it was to get up every day knowing you were gone? His silence spoke volumes. He looked down, the shame of his actions evident on his face. I'm so sorry, he finally whispered, but the words felt hollow, an empty gesture in the face of everything he had done. I don't want your apologies, Sarah said, shaking her head. What I want is for you to face the reality of your choices. You can't just come back into our lives and pretend like nothing happened. You left us to deal with everything on our own. And now? Now you're living a life of luxury while I was left drowning. The truth of her words hung heavy in the air, a palpable tension between them. Michael reached out as if to touch her arm, but she stepped back, feeling a rush of fury. I can't believe you would think I would accept you back into our lives after everything you've done. You thought you could just walk away from your responsibilities? You thought you could live without consequences? I want to make it right, Sarah, he insisted, desperation seeping into his voice. I'm back now. I can help. I'll take care of the debts. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Sarah stared at him, disbelief mixed with anger. Make it right? You think it's that simple? You think you can just swoop back in and fix everything? You can't erase the past, Michael. You can't just make everything go away because you say so. Please, Sarah. I never meant to hurt you. I was scared, and I made the wrong choices. Scared, she repeated, incredulous. You have no idea what true fear is. You didn't just leave me, you left our children. You abandoned them. You abandoned me. In that moment, Sarah felt a surge of clarity. She knew she had to take control of her life, to ensure that she and her children wouldn't suffer any longer because of Michael's decisions. The anger that coursed through her was not just about his betrayal, it was about reclaiming her power. "I'm done," she said finally, her voice resolute. "I'm done with your excuses. I won't let you hurt me or our children again. You made your choice, and now you need to face the consequences." With that, she turned on her heel, leaving Michael behind in the luxurious dining room. She walked away, each step feeling lighter as she shed the weight of his betrayal. The confrontation had reignited a fire within her, and she knew she was ready to fight back. For herself, for her children, and for the future she was determined to build, one that no longer included the man who had caused her so much pain. Devastation washed over Sarah as she left the dining room, Michael's shocked expression burning in her mind. The confrontation had ignited a fury within her, but as she walked away, she felt a new sense of purpose begin to take root. She could no longer allow Michael's choices to dictate her life or the lives of her children. It was time to take control and make him pay for what he had done. In the following days, Sarah's anger transformed into determination. She had spent years trying to rebuild her life after Michael's betrayal, and now that he was back, she knew she needed to act. She couldn't let him walk away unscathed after faking his death and leaving her to fend for herself. She needed a plan, a way to hold him accountable for the pain he had caused. She began by reaching out to an old acquaintance, Jenna, who had once worked in finance. Jenna had connections that could help Sarah gather the information she needed about Michael. They met at a quiet cafe, and Sarah shared her story, her voice steady and determined. "He's living a lie, Jenna," Sarah explained, her eyes blazing with conviction. "He faked his death to escape his debts, and now he's pretending everything is fine while I've been left to deal with the aftermath. I need to expose him." Jenna listened intently, nodding as Sarah spoke. "You're right to want to take action. If he's been living under a new identity, there's bound to be a paper trail. I can help you dig into his finances." Sarah felt a rush of relief. With Jenna's help, she began to formulate a plan to gather incriminating evidence against Michael. They spent hours poring over financial records and searching online databases, uncovering details about his new life. It was like a puzzle, each piece revealing more about the man who had abandoned her. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah's resolve strengthened. She discovered that Michael had been living in luxury while she had struggled to make ends meet. He had secured a job that paid him handsomely, and with each revelation, her anger morphed into a fierce desire for justice. But Sarah knew she couldn't rely solely on legal action. The debt collectors who had tormented her for years had their own motives and were not inclined to let bygones be bygones. The thought of using them to her advantage started to form in her mind. If Michael had created a new life, perhaps she could leverage the very people who had harassed her for so long. With Jenna's assistance, Sarah gathered a dossier of evidence against Michael, detailing his fraudulent activities, including proof of his new identity and the income he had been hiding. It felt empowering to finally take control of her narrative, but the next step would be the most dangerous. "Are you sure about this?" Jenna asked, concern etched on her face as they sat in the cafe, the papers spread out between them. "These debt collectors aren't exactly the most reputable people." "I don't care," Sarah replied, determination lacing her voice. "They've been after me for years, and now it's time for me to turn the tables. I'll offer them Michael in exchange for my and my children's safety. It's a risk, but I can't let him get away with what he's done." Jenna hesitated, but she could see the fire in Sarah's eyes. "Okay, but you need to be careful. We'll have to approach them the right way." With a plan forming, Sarah set out to contact the debt collectors. She gathered her courage, knowing that this was a pivotal moment in her quest for justice. She reached out to the main collector, a man named Victor, who had been particularly aggressive in his demands. "Victor, I have a proposition for you," Sarah said when she finally managed to get him on the phone. "I know where to find Michael Thompson." Silence hung heavy on the line, and Sarah could practically hear the gears turning in Victor's mind. "Michael Thompson? The one who faked his death. What do you have in mind? I have evidence of his new identity and the money he's been hiding, Sarah replied, her heart racing. If you're willing to let me and my children go, I can lead you to him. You can get what you're owed, and I can finally be free of this nightmare. Victor's interest peaked, and he leaned in closer. You've got my attention, Sarah. If what you say is true, I could arrange something. But you need to be careful. This isn't just business, it's personal for you. I can't promise safety. I don't need promises. I need action, she said, her voice firm. If you want Michael, I'll give you everything you need to find him. Just leave me and my kids alone. With the deal set, Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline. She had taken back control of her life, and the power of vengeance coursed through her veins. It was no longer just about survival, it was about making Michael face the consequences of his actions. As she gathered the final pieces of evidence, Sarah felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She had been living in fear for too long, but now she was the one holding the cards. Michael's betrayal had pushed her to the brink, but it had also awakened a fierce warrior within her. On the day they planned to turn over the information, Sarah felt a mix of nerves and excitement. She knew that this would be a pivotal moment in her life. As she sat across from Victor, papers laid out on the table, she could feel the weight of her choices bearing down on her. This is everything you need, Sarah said, sliding the folder across the table. The proof of his identity, his current job, and the money he's been hiding. I want this over. I want my life back. Victor's eyes gleamed with interest as he perused the documents. You've done your homework, Sarah. This is solid evidence. We'll take care of him. And you? You'll be free of this debt. As she watched Victor's mind race with possibilities, Sarah felt a flicker of satisfaction. The man who had abandoned her was finally going to face the consequences of his actions, and she would finally be able to reclaim her life. The battle had been long and arduous, but she was ready to see it through to the end. With the knowledge that she had taken matters into her own hands, Sarah felt empowered. She was no longer a victim, she was a force to be reckoned with, and she was ready to emerge from the shadows of Michael's betrayal and embrace her new life. With the plan firmly in place, Sarah felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation coursing through her veins. She had spent weeks gathering evidence against Michael and orchestrating a way to ensure he faced the consequences of his actions. Now it was time to set her plan in motion. In the days leading up to the meeting with Victor and the debt collectors, Sarah meticulously organized all the evidence she had collected. Each document was crucial, proof of Michael's new identity, his job details, and the financial records that exposed the hidden wealth he had amassed while leaving her in despair. This was no longer just about revenge, it was about reclaiming her power and ensuring that her children would never have to suffer because of Michael's choices again. The day of the meeting arrived, and Sarah's heart raced as she prepared to confront the man who had caused her so much pain. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple yet professional outfit that made her feel confident. Looking in the mirror, she took a deep breath, reminding herself of the strength she had cultivated throughout this ordeal. This was her moment, and she wouldn't back down. She arrived at the designated location, a nondescript office building on the outskirts of town, feeling the weight of her decision settle around her shoulders. As she walked through the entrance, the sterile smell of freshly cleaned floors filled her nostrils, grounding her in the reality of the situation. This was it. Victor was waiting for her in a small conference room. He looked up as she entered, a calculating gleam in his eye. You're on time. Good to see someone who values punctuality, he said, a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. Let's get to it, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. She set the folder containing all the evidence on the table between them and opened it, revealing the meticulously organized documents inside. Victor leaned forward, his interest piqued as he examined the contents. You really did your homework, he remarked, flipping through the papers. This is impressive. Where did you get this information? Let's just say I have my ways, Sarah responded, crossing her arms defiantly. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her as she watched Victor analyze each piece of evidence. What matters is that it's all legitimate, and it's enough to bring him down. Michael Thompson's been living under the radar for too long. This could give us the leverage we need to recover the money he owes, Victor said, a glint of excitement in his eyes. But we'll need to act quickly. If he senses we're onto him, he might disappear again. Sarah nodded, understanding the urgency of the situation. I want him to know I'm the one who did this. He can't escape the mess he created. He needs to face the consequences of abandoning us. Victor leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. I can respect that. I'll make sure he knows it was you who orchestrated this. It'll hit harder that way. Feeling a surge of empowerment, Sarah took a deep breath. What's the plan? Victor explained the next steps in detail, outlining how they would approach Michael and ensure that he understood the gravity of his situation. They would confront him at his workplace, where he would least expect it. The element of surprise would work in their favor, and Sarah would be there to witness the moment he was brought to justice. As they finalized the details, Sarah's heart raced. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She was finally taking a stand against the man who had shattered her life. No more living in fear, no more letting his choices dictate her future. With the plan in place, Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her. She would finally have the closure she had been searching for. As she left the meeting with Victor, she felt lighter, the weight of her burdens beginning to lift. But with each passing hour, her nerves crept back in. The reality of what was about to happen weighed heavily on her mind. Would she be able to confront Michael without losing her composure? Would she find the strength to follow through on her plan? That night, as she lay in bed, Sarah replayed the events in her mind. She thought about her twins and how much they meant to her. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about ensuring they had a better future. She needed to be strong for them, to show them that they could overcome any obstacle, no matter how insurmountable it seemed. The next morning, Sarah prepared herself for the confrontation. She dressed in her most professional attire, wanting to appear confident and assertive. She practiced her words in front of the mirror, rehearsing what she would say when she finally came face to face with Michael. As the time approached for the meeting, Sarah felt a knot of anticipation twist in her stomach. She arrived at the location where they planned to confront Michael, her heart racing as she took a deep breath to steady herself. This was a pivotal moment in her life, and she had to see it through. Victor arrived shortly after, and they exchanged a determined glance. "Are you ready?" he asked, a mixture of encouragement and caution in his voice. "I am," Sarah replied, her resolve solidifying. This was it. She would confront the man who had betrayed her, the man who had turned her life upside down, and she would finally reclaim her power. As they prepared to execute the plan, Sarah's heart raced with anticipation. She could feel the weight of the past pressing down on her, but she knew this was her moment. It was time for Michael to face the consequences of his choices, and she was ready to take that step. The plan was set in motion, and there was no turning back. After the confrontation with Michael, Sarah felt a whirlwind of emotions, relief, anger, and a fierce determination to take control of her life. But there was one more person she needed to confront, Claudia, the woman who had been living with Michael. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Claudia was complicit in his deception, and she was ready to confront her about the role she had played in Michael's betrayal. The next day, armed with the evidence she had gathered and a renewed sense of purpose, Sarah tracked down Claudia. It wasn't difficult. Claudia had been living in the same city, and Sarah had gathered enough information to know where she worked. The thought of facing the woman who had taken Michael's side filled her with a mix of dread and resolve. As Sarah approached the trendy cafe where Claudia worked, she felt a surge of adrenaline. She had spent so long mourning the loss of her marriage and struggling to rebuild her life, and now she was ready to confront the woman who had added to her pain. When Sarah stepped inside, the warm scent of coffee and baked goods enveloped her, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on Claudia, who stood behind the counter, chatting and laughing with customers. The sight of her ignited a wave of anger within Sarah. Taking a deep breath, she walked up to the counter. Claudia looked up, her smile faltering as she recognized Sarah. "Oh. Sarah," she said, her voice trailing off. "What are you doing here? Can we talk?" Sarah replied, her voice steady but laced with tension. "I need to speak with you about Michael." Claudia glanced around, clearly uncomfortable. "This isn't the best place." "Now," Sarah insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I want to know why you helped him." Claudia hesitated but then nodded, leading Sarah to a small, secluded table in the back of the cafe. As they sat down, Sarah felt her heart racing. This was the moment she had been waiting for. "What do you want to know?" Claudia asked, crossing her arms defensively. "Did you know Michael was faking his death?" Sarah demanded, her voice low but firm. "Did you know he left me to deal with the aftermath of his choices while you were living a new life with him?" Claudia's expression shifted, a flicker of guilt passing over her features. "I didn't know the whole story," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew he had debts, but I thought he was just trying to escape his past. He never mentioned you or the kids." "Really?" Sarah scoffed, disbelief washing over her. "You expect me to believe that? You were living with him, and you had no idea about his family? You didn't think to ask?" Claudia shifted in her seat, her discomfort palpable. "It wasn't like that," she replied, her tone defensive. "I met him after everything had happened. He was different, a changed man. I thought he was starting fresh." "Starting fresh?" Sarah echoed, incredulous. "He abandoned me and our children. You think that's justifiable? You were complicit in his lies. You helped him build a new life while I was left to pick up the pieces." Claudia opened her mouth to respond but paused, clearly struggling with her words. "I never meant for this to happen," she said finally. "I didn't know he had a family. I thought I was helping him escape a bad situation." Sarah's anger flared, but she forced herself to take a deep breath. "You don't get to play the victim here, Claudia. You chose to be with a man who deceived me, who hurt our children. Your choices have consequences." "I had no idea." Claudia insisted, her voice rising in desperation. "I really didn't. He told me he was alone, that he was starting over. I wanted to believe him." The defensiveness in Claudia's voice only fueled Sarah's anger. "And what about now? Now that you know the truth? Are you going to stand by him again? Are you going to help him cover up his past?" Claudia's expression faltered, uncertainty creeping into her eyes. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "I thought we were building a future together. I thought he was finally being honest with me." "Honest?" Sarah laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "You really think he would ever be honest? He lied to me for years, and now he's living a life of luxury while I was left to struggle. You're just another chapter in his deceitful story." Claudia lowered her gaze, visibly shaken by Sarah's words. "I didn't want any of this. I was trying to help him," she said quietly. "Help him?" Sarah repeated, her anger simmering just below the surface. "You should have thought about the consequences of your actions. You're not innocent in this, Claudia. You've been living in a fantasy while I've been left to deal with the harsh reality." "I didn't know he had a family," Claudia said again, her voice trembling. "I swear, I didn't. I thought he was starting fresh, just like me." "Maybe that's true, but you chose to be with him knowing he had a past," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "You made that choice, and now you need to take responsibility for it." Claudia looked up, her eyes filled with regret. "What do you want from me, Sarah?" "I want you to understand that you can't just walk away from this. You're complicit in his lies, and I won't let either of you escape the consequences. You may have thought you were helping him, but now you have to face the reality of the choices you made." Tears welled in Claudia's eyes, and for a moment, Sarah felt a pang of sympathy. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Maybe not, but the fact remains that you were a part of this mess," Sarah said, her tone softening slightly. I want you to know that I'm going to make sure Michael faces the consequences of his actions. I won't let him continue to live a lie." Claudia nodded slowly, her expression a mix of shame and confusion. "I understand. I really do. I thought he was different, but now I see how wrong I was." "Good," Sarah said firmly. "You need to think about what you've done and how it affects others. This isn't just about you and Michael anymore. You've involved innocent lives, and it's time to make it right." As Sarah stood up to leave, she felt a sense of closure wash over her. Confronting Claudia had been necessary. She needed to assert her strength and make it clear that she would not be a victim any longer. This was her life, and she was ready to reclaim it. As she stepped out of the cafe, Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a renewed sense of determination. She was one step closer to ensuring that Michael faced the consequences of his actions, and she was ready to move forward, stronger and more resolute than ever. With Michael out of her life and the debt collectors no longer a threat, Sarah returned home to her children, feeling a sense of relief she hadn't experienced in years. The turmoil that had enveloped her for so long was beginning to lift, replaced by a newfound clarity and determination. She opened the door to her house and stepped inside, the familiar scent of home wrapping around her like a warm embrace. The twins were playing in the living room, their laughter ringing through the air, and for a moment, Sarah stood still, taking in the sight of them. They were the light of her life, and everything she had fought for had been for their sake. As she watched them, she felt a sense of purpose surge within her. She was ready to start anew, to build a life that was free from the shadows of Michael's betrayal. "Mommy," they shouted in unison as they spotted her, their faces lighting up with joy. They rushed toward her, wrapping their small arms around her waist, and Sarah knelt down to embrace them. "We missed you." "I missed you too, my loves," she said, holding them tightly. In that moment, all the pain and heartache melted away, replaced by the warmth of their unconditional love. She was determined to create a safe, happy environment for them, one where they could thrive without the weight of their father's choices hanging over them. Over the next few days, Sarah focused on her children, soaking up every moment with them. She took them to the park, where they laughed and played without a care in the world. She prepared their favorite meals and read them bedtime stories, savoring the joy of being present in their lives. As they sat together on the couch, snuggled under a blanket, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of hope for the future. But the newfound peace wasn't just about her children, it was about her own healing as well. Sarah began to embrace the idea of a fresh start. She took time to reflect on her journey, acknowledging the pain she had endured while recognizing her strength and resilience. She had survived the darkest moments of her life and emerged on the other side, ready to take charge of her destiny. One afternoon, while the twins napped, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with a notebook in front of her. Inspired by the clarity she had gained, she started to jot down her dreams and aspirations. She wrote about wanting to provide a loving home for her children, to be a role model for them, and to pursue her own passions, something she had put on hold during her tumultuous relationship with Michael. As she wrote, a vision of her future began to take shape. She had always dreamed of starting her own business, and now felt like the perfect time to pursue that dream. With her newfound freedom, she wanted to create a space that not only supported her family but also reflected her values and passions. The idea of opening a small bakery took root in her mind. Baking had always been a source of joy for Sarah, a way to express her creativity. She could envision a cozy shop filled with the scent of fresh bread and pastries, a place where families could come together to enjoy homemade treats. It was a dream that felt within reach, and she was determined to make it a reality. With a sense of purpose driving her, Sarah began researching the steps she would need to take to start her bakery. She created a budget, explored potential locations, and even began experimenting with new recipes in her kitchen. The more she focused on her dream, the more invigorated she felt. Sarah also reached out to her neighbor, Mrs. Reynolds, for support. The older woman had always believed in Sarah's potential and was excited to hear about her plans. "You have a gift, dear," Mrs. Reynolds said, her eyes sparkling with encouragement. "I can't wait to see you turn this dream into a reality." As the weeks passed, Sarah poured her heart and soul into her bakery project, balancing her time between caring for her twins and preparing for her new venture. The twins loved helping her in the kitchen, measuring ingredients, and decorating cupcakes. It became a family affair, and Sarah cherished these moments, knowing they were creating lasting memories together. Slowly, the bakery began to take shape. Sarah found a small storefront in the heart of their community, a place where families gathered and local businesses thrived. With the help of her savings and a small loan, she was able to secure the location and start the renovations. The space was filled with potential, and Sarah could already envision the vibrant bakery bustling with life. As she worked tirelessly to bring her vision to life, Sarah also took the time to ensure her emotional well-being. She sought therapy to process the trauma she had experienced and to learn how to navigate her new life. Through therapy, she gained valuable tools to cope with stress and anxiety, allowing her to approach her new beginnings with a healthier mindset. The day finally arrived for the grand opening of her bakery, and Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. She had poured everything into this dream, and now it was time to share it with the world. The twins helped her set up, their faces beaming with pride as they placed colorful signs and baked goods in the display cases. As the doors opened, a sense of accomplishment washed over her. Friends, family, and neighbors filled the bakery, their laughter and chatter creating a warm atmosphere. Sarah greeted everyone with a smile, her heart swelling with joy as she watched her dream come to life. In that moment, surrounded by the love of her children and the support of her community, Sarah realized that she had finally reclaimed her life. The pain of Michael's betrayal had transformed into a powerful catalyst for change, propelling her toward a future filled with hope and possibility. As the sun set outside, casting a golden glow over the bakery, Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She was no longer defined by her past, she was forging her own path, one filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. With her children by her side and her bakery bustling with life, Sarah embraced this new beginning with open arms, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. If you think the story is good, leave a comment with the number 1, and if not, please subscribe to the channel. If the video is helpful to you, don't forget to hit the like button.